You're listening to episode 58 of The Secular Buddhist. Welcome to The Secular Buddhist. I'm Ted Meissner. The Secular Buddhist is the podcast and website for modern, secular application of early Buddhist thought. The podcast has interviews and roundtable discussions pertaining to engaged Buddhist training and practice, and the companion website has show notes for each episode, along with resource materials on Buddhism, critical thinking, science, secularism, and skeptical thought. Though the podcast focuses on core practice from a secular viewpoint, more traditional teachings are welcome and openly discussed. Rick Bateman and Tim Kiely join us for a roundtable discussion of how to start a secular Buddhist group with tools like Meetup and Ning. Hi everyone, glad you're here. And chances are, you're here because of a technological word of mouth. Either you found the podcast through iTunes, you got to the Facebook fan page, or perhaps through a web search found the website for the Secular Buddhist. It may be that one of your friends recommended the podcast. Be sure to thank them for me. One thing I hear quite frequently, though, is where someone who is more secular can find a group of people to practice, study, and socialize with in person. And the truth is, secular Buddhism is a very new way of approaching a very old tradition. And it's breaking with that tradition in ways that can be very uncomfortable for some people. We have something of an edge to walk, as we few openly secular practitioners start to stand on our own without ostracizing our friends who incline to a more faith-based path. So, to support that growing of our comparatively small community, we can take advantage of some opportunities the modern world offers. Today's episode is an interview with two of the forerunners of this growing secular Buddhist community, Rick Bateman and Tim Kiely. Each has started their own secular Buddhist group, originally on Meetup.com, and now also on Ning. Whatever you use, the effect is the same, the building of community. I'd also like to point out that this episode is being released in conjunction with a new page on the website about how to start your own group. The instructions were designed to use with Meetup, but the basic ideas can be easily applied to other applications as well. Please don't feel obliged to go with Meetup. Ning is another good option, and there are lots of others as well. Rick Bateman is the founder of the website secularbuddhism.com. He is actively striving to form a non-profit organization for secular Buddhism, and currently teaches the Buddhism for Beginners course he developed in Victoria, British Columbia. He is an experienced instructor, having taught a variety of technical courses at Kamasung College's continuing education program for several years. He has served as Vice President of Human Resources and Operations at an online learning company and is currently the Director of Operations for a local software company. Tim Kiely is a teacher, longtime meditator, and mindfulness-based stress reduction instructor. He founded and facilitates the Cambridge-Somerville Secular Buddhist Meetup Group. Tim offers MBSR courses in Cambridge, Massachusetts, Asheville, North Carolina, and online at discoveringyourbalance.com. Tim is currently working with other educators to bring the MBSR program to teachers, students, and parents. So, sit back, relax, and have a nice Yunnan Mandarin special tea. You know I'm linking these on the episode page, right? And today we are here with Rick Bateman and Tim Kiely. Rick, thanks so much for being here.
Hi, Ted. Glad to be here.
And Tim, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Ted. Very glad to be here.
So as we recall, those of you who have joined us and been listening to the podcast before, we have spoken with Rick Bateman in the past. He can be found at secularbuddhism.wordpress.com. And we interviewed him in episode 29, titled Secular Buddhism Canada Style. And Tim Kiely joins us as another person who has started a secular Buddhist meetup group. And we haven't had a chance to chat with you before, Tim. So what I'd like to do is start with you telling us a little bit about your background and how you came to have a Buddhist practice, in particular a secular Buddhist practice.
I came to the practice probably 6 or 7 years ago. I think just, I'd come across Buddhist ideas and meditated a bit back in, my college days. And there was just something that kept rekindling an interest in what exactly is meditation and what exactly is Buddhism. And again, about 6 or 7 years ago, I think I was just at a point where I was ready to look a little bit more deeply into that urge to understand myself a little bit better. And I remember reading John Kabat-Zinn's book, Wherever You Go, There You Are. And it was one of those experiences that I think might be familiar to some people, where the book was describing me to myself. It was very unusual. I was reading these things that someone else had written, and it just felt so deeply true about myself. So that definitely caused a certain sort of moment. Definitely something I thought needed to be explored a little bit more. And that led me to look around. I live in the Boston area, so there are quite a few meditation centers around, and I had a chance to explore a bit. And I ended up at the Cambridge Insight Meditation Center, which is in the Theravadan tradition. It's a Vipassana center. And the practice there, again, it happened to be what fit me, fit my personality. And so I've been an active member there ever since. And I found it really interesting, the sort of momentum of the practice. The more I practice, the more sort of motivation sort of develops naturally. And I think that is what ultimately led me to starting a meetup. It seems to be just the next stage in my exploration of this path.
Mm-hmm. Now, you and Rick have been chatting for a bit. Rick, why don't you join in and tell us a little bit about that?
So I had started the new secular Buddhism meetup group, and I'd run it on my own for a while, and then after our last conversation, Tim contacted me and was interested in starting one up himself. So we had some correspondence, and here we are today.
Excellent. And I know that there are a couple of other groups that have started as well. And Tim, you had forwarded me a link to an article from the Somerville Patch titled New Secular Buddhist Meditation Group is Mindful of Welcoming Vibe. Tim Kiely's Monday night group is Relaxing Treat that's open to all. Tell us a little bit about that article and how that came about.
I'm not so sure. I think Meetup does either sort of local interest websites pull information off of Meetup, or Meetup shares their events calendar with other websites. But this particular publication, I think it's the Somerville Patch, is an online newspaper, and they somehow, through Meetup, found out about the Meetup, and the journalist just contacted me and asked if it would be okay to come by. So he and I had a brief chat about privacy issues. I wanted to make sure that he would respect the privacy and the nature of the space. That it is. I try to make it a welcoming and sort of safe, genuine space where people who are new and who might not know anyone yet will feel comfortable. So I felt awkward if there would be a journalist sort of lurking in the corners watching us.
Taking notes.
Exactly. So he was very professional and very considerate of those concerns and understood I was being a little bit overly protective, I think. He has a little bit of experience with practice himself. So he came by one evening. We do a go-round and either do an introduction or, everyone says a couple words about their practice to begin. So he explained what he was doing, and everyone welcomed him and was glad to have him along. Yeah, that's about it. It was interesting that I think probably 6 or 7 people joined the meetup the day after that little blurb appeared online, which was nice.
That's great. Yeah, looking at it, I see that it has a Facebook link on it, and 10 people recommended this, and so that in itself helps getting the word out that it exists. And I know Meetup is very good about when you sign up for Meetup, you click various things that you're interested in, and so you do get notified of things that are appropriate to the content that you've asked to see. But not everyone may necessarily be familiar with Meetup, and they may not be on that. So this additional venue to get the word out has apparently been very helpful to what you're seeing there.
Definitely, without a doubt. And as you mentioned, that feature where people can sign up to get notifications about new meetups in areas that they might be interested in, I think that makes it very easy for people to discover what's going on.
Yeah, I agree. So one of the things we wanted to chat about is that one of the things that we value as secularists is that we have a flexible practice that fits to different people's needs in how they approach Buddhism and meditation. And as a result, the formats that you both have are a little bit different based on the circumstances of where you are and what your community is like. Rick, if you would chat for a few minutes about the format you have for your group, and then Tim will ask you the same question.
Sure. My format is based on a couple of things that I sort of brought to the idea of forming a new group. One was probably one of the main things that drives the format of the group that I facilitate is that I noticed in many of the other groups that I'd attended over about 10 years now, a lot of time you were expected to meditate or chant or whatever without much explanation about exactly why you were doing this. It's not uncommon to walk into a group and they say, okay, welcome everybody. We're going to start our meditation now. Ding goes the bell. And,
and there are a lot of confused expressions around, and you see the thought bubbles with the WTF question mark in them.
Yeah, and at some groups, people would put up their hand and say, "What am I supposed to do while I'm meditating? What am I supposed to think or anything?" They were really very, very new to this. So that's probably one of the major drivers of my format. Is that my format is 2 hours long. And the guts of it is about an hour's worth of actual teaching about Buddhism, from the basically Pali Canon kind of stuff, very very basic, as close to the original teachings as I can get. And the main purpose for it is to explain why are we here, why are we at this meeting, why are we coming here, and what is it we're trying to do and how do we get there, and to lay out the whole roadmap for people. So that very much is why is probably the major driver of the format. And that's usually ends up, even though I do write up a lesson plan, print it off and hand it out to everybody so that they can go home and go, what was it he said there in the middle? I forget. So they can look at the sheet of paper and remember what the meeting was about. And the meeting is the let's call it the teaching part of the meeting is actually more of a discussion, more of a conversation. People ask questions. Sometimes I answer them. Sometimes other people answer them. We all encourage each other to make it as personal and meaningful to the day-to-day lives as possible, and even to talk about personal stories and like that. But the other thing that I brought to it was I noticed when I went to these other groups that time to socially connect with others, at other attendees, was very limited, sometimes almost non-existent. You come in silently, take your shoes off, bow, and participate in the group, and then you do the same thing as you go out the door, and, months or longer may go by, and you never meet any of these people. So I made sure that was a significant part of it. So our meetings start off with here's the third input to it. Was I went to some other groups, and I found that their meditation periods for beginners were challengingly long. 45 minutes when you walk in the door your first time.
Wow. That would be kind of tough. Yeah.
Yeah. And that had happened to me. I had gone to certain groups here in town, and you walk in and welcome everybody, and let's start with our 45 minutes, followed by about another 45 minutes of sitting still listening to, Yeah,
so, the most challenging sit I ever had, and this is directly pertaining to what you're talking about, was going to a local center.
Yeah.
And it was just 10 minutes, because it was a beginner session. It was geared towards folks who had no experience.
Yeah.
Just that 10 minutes was really hard. I could have imagined trying that at 45 and then maybe another 45.
Yeah. I found it, I know for sure it would be off-putting to the majority of people who walked into that blind. So our groups start off with currently we're still only at 10 minutes to start, but we have 2 meditation. So I actually sneak 20 minutes in there on them. So we start off with a concentration meditation, and I explain how to do it and why we're doing it. Then, that starts just after a little brief social time as everybody comes in. Then we have our concentration meditation. Then we have the meet, our discussion, and then we have a break, et cetera, of course. And then towards the end, we have a longer insight meditation session, which may go anywhere from 15 to 20, 25 minutes. And it's an insight meditation, and I usually now that is usually a guided meditation that I usually do at that section. So that's what our formats are like and why.
Excellent. So Tim, how about your format? I noticed that because I'm a member of all the groups, I do see the notes that come in, and one of the things I've noticed you do that I really like is you send a notification to people who are part of the meetup with something for them to think about during the week.
Yeah, the format that we follow is not terribly dissimilar from what Rick described. Let me first just echo what a couple of things Rick said that I've found myself. There have been quite a few people who are relatively new to meditation practice and very, very interested and very eager to explore, who have gone to other centers and, just as Rick was describing, have walked in blind to a 45-minute sitting and have felt completely lost and and almost traumatized by the experience because they didn't know.
Well, life is suffering after all.
And the social aspect is very important. I started the group because I felt the social aspect of practice was missing from my practice. The Buddha in several places stressed the importance of Sangha. And I really believe that. I think if we support each other, it makes the practice much more real. And without the opportunity for real discussion and real socializing time before and after to really get to know each other, that doesn't really, at least for me, hadn't really developed in other contexts. And quite a few of the regular attendees to the meetup have said the same thing. A few people have mentioned that they've had experiences with church groups that one woman is a singer and she sings in a choir in a church, and she says she really envies the connection that the congregation has, but she doesn't believe, so she feels she's not a part of that group. So she said she was excited about this meetup because we're trying to form that kind of social connection just around a mindfulness meditation practice. So, I'm sorry, let me go back then and answer your question about the format. Again, the format isn't terribly different than Rick's. We sit for a few moments. I never timed it, probably 45 seconds to a minute when we get there, just to settle into the space a little bit and let the body relax a little bit. Then we'll go around and people can say a few words about themselves or their experience over the week, or pass. Everyone's always welcome to pass and not say anything. And that's a chance when discussion often sort of arises organically, because we do use a weekly experiment so that we all have a similar experience throughout the week to talk about. And those weekly experiments are anything from trying to do, say, a 3 or 4 minute seeing practice throughout the day. This time of year is great for that because of all the decorations and lights. One other practice was an eating meditation where, not trying to push it too far by saying eat 3 meals a day mindfully in silence. We're not trying to overshoot in terms of expectations. Just simply try to take a few bites, mindfully. We had done a mindful eating exercise that week in the meetup, so then the idea was to try a little bit each day on your own. And then after that, we'll often do a bit of movement, either a walking meditation, some real gentle hatha yoga stretching. And one of the members has some experience with Qigong, so he generously offered to lead some Qigong, so he's been doing that. We usually alternate every other week. And then we'll do a sitting. And I'm particularly fond of Jason's fifth on learning meditation. I really love that fresh approach to what is meditation and how can we really bring meditation into our daily lives. So the formal practice we have, we've been experimenting with different types of guided meditations. Sometimes just the traditional breath, a concentration meditation, sometimes insight meditation. Sometimes we'll do a listening meditation. I've been introducing metta practice a little bit. And then we'll have a short discussion about what that experience was like. So people who want to share and discuss whatever type of meditation we were doing that week, how that was for them. That also leads to a lot of discussion. And we usually run about an hour and a half, sometimes up to 2 hours. I try to keep it about an hour and a half so that people feel free to hang on and talk afterwards. So I kind of try to leave it a half an hour of informal social time afterwards. So that's basically our format.
So it sounds like for both of you, it's very important to have a welcoming atmosphere regardless of one's experience. If you're a beginner, if you've been doing this for 20 years, it's still going to be the same welcoming kind of environment for you. There's going to be some basic information and a couple of meditation segments that are of manageable levels, particularly for newcomers, because a lot of people joining these groups are new to the practice and that they didn't find a group with which they resonated prior to this.
Mm-hmm, that's right.
And then again, developing that social connection, I think, is very important because as you're both saying, and as is in the Pali Canon, Sangha community is very much a part of this. And I think it's one reason we see in skeptic groups and atheist groups and all other kinds of groups that's what that's doing, because there's a recognition that people who are of a particularly faithful religious tradition have that sense of community, whether it's every Sunday or whenever it is, they've got that, and that's part of it, and it's mutually supportive, and that's a very important part of the practice. It's why Buddha Dhamma Sangha is the triple gem, because we are supporting that. Tim, you mentioned mindful eating, and that made me think of one of the skeptics groups have their regular groups being drinking skeptically. I was wondering if we should have mindful drinking as a social component to some of these.
It would work for a few minutes, and then it would all unravel.
So one of the things I wanted to follow up on is what some of the benefits that you're seeing for you and for others in having started these meetup groups. Rick, we'll start with you.
There's very, very definite benefits for me, personally. I'd have to say nothing I've done in the past 10 years has caused my practice to deepen the way, excuse me, facilitating this weekly meetup has. It's, as I mentioned, part of every week is a teaching period. So I have to spend time preparing for that, obviously, and writing up the sort of lesson plan, as it were, for the class. But in order to do that, that means I have to think deeply about what the next class is and where it fits in the sort of chain of meetings that we've had up and subjects that we've had up to that point. Or it may respond to a trend in questioning that I'm getting from the group. But what that means is I not only have to then go hit the books and research the background, because I may know it, but that's not the same as being able to articulate it and communicate it in a meaningful way to others. So even though I may know it, I still have to go get the books, and also I have to get all the background and related material, and then be able to answer the inevitable pop quiz questions. Which, as you can imagine, they're pretty steep. In order to, another part of doing this though every week is that I have to sort of personally sync my practice into that point for the week, and really delve deep within myself, in my own meditation practice, in my own everyday, and be prepared to talk about it on a very personal, very sincere level. Now, the result of that, of course, is that I'm practicing Buddhism a lot more, or a lot more deeply than I was previous to this. So, facilitating this weekly meeting, the main benefit that I've received is that, and I have seen significant, I don't know if you'd call it progress or change or what you want to call it, in my practice as a result of it.
Tim, how about you? What sorts of benefits are you seeing for yourself and the others in your group?
The connection is definitely something that is invaluable. For me to know that there's a place I go every week, and I'm going to see many of the same faces, and everyone is very, very genuine about the practice and very, very present and welcoming and just glad to be there. That's a great support for my own practice. And as the facilitator of the group, similar to what Rick mentioned, I don't really do any presentation of material myself, but I do lead some of the guided meditations, and by nature of the role of being the facilitator, often questions are directed at me. And that's really fascinating to see how serving in that role as facilitator has made my practice very real and immediate in an unexpected way. For instance, leading a guided meditation with, say, 5, maybe 4 people in the room I know and 5 people who are brand new, I noticed certain doubt coming in, like, oh, is it too long? Am I saying too much? Am I not saying enough? And it's really fascinating to watch that and to hold that uncertainty, but just keep my commitment to the practice because I believe in the value of the practice. It's been really, really deepening to work with that type of uncertainty and faith at the same time. I guess it's just great to provide the space, because many of the members have expressed the same thing I have, that they were really looking for a social connection in their practice, and it's been very, very easy for me to be the facilitator to create that space. And that's very rewarding, and I think it creates a lot of momentum for my own practice in reaching out to others and finding connection in practice. It's been so much easier than I expected it to be, and it's rewarding to be part of offering this space for others.
And that energizes your own practice.
Without a doubt.
Yeah, I'd like to, if I could jump in there, I'd like to comment on Tim's mention about the uncertainty while facilitating. That certainly happens to me all the time, and I think it's an important point to reiterate, because if anybody else is thinking of starting a group like this, part of the fear is that you're going to be up in front of X number of people and you don't know everything, and so you definitely have to go in with the willingness of not knowing everything, and that's perfectly okay. And so I just don't want folks to get the impression that, Tim or I went into this, thinking we knew everything, but rather quite the opposite, and had to deal just like anybody would with the inevitable anxiety that arises about doing this kind of thing. But also another thing I'd like to comment on what Tim said about the value of, in the moment while you are facilitating the group, and the doubts and worries and temptations that arise. They certainly do, and it is, again, deepening of one's practice, because you're able to sit there and field a question and feel the things that arise, which is very much mindfulness and Buddhist practice, and you're able to go, oh, look at that. There's my ego wanting to do
wanting
this.
to run away from the room because I don't know what the answer is.
And so those feelings will arise quite strongly. So it's a very valuable form of practice, because you're right there in the moment, surrounded by eyes looking at you, and you're observing these things arise within yourself. And it's just a great moment to practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you both have experience as teachers, as your vocation, and I imagine that facilitating a more flat group. I mean that is in, you're not with the big desk at the head of the classroom. This is a different kind of situation. What kinds of things have you noticed about how that's different than classic teaching? Because many of the people who may be starting their own groups, they don't have that background. They're not a teacher.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing I'll mention is that, yes, it's very much flat or a peer kind of group. I don't present myself as a spiritual teacher or any kind of authority. I present myself simply as a person just like them, except that I have a little bit more knowledge and experience I'd like to share. But the fact that one is not sitting there in a robe with disciples and incense and gongs and all the attributes of power and authority, and also, like you said, you don't have the big desk like when one is a teacher kind of thing. That levels the playing field considerably, and so people ask direct questions, and I think they ask a lot more questions. So it's a very positive experience. Now, mind you, I did teach adult education for 3 years at our local college, and it's not too different than that, because adults in general are a lot less concerned about authority than younger folks are. So it's pretty much a peer-to-peer discussion in my experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's one of the things you brought up is people being able to question. And one of the quotes I'd written and posted on the Facebook page is, a secular approach to practice can expand personal development beyond the confines of the institution of religion. This frees us from the course plotted by predetermined answers of dogma, allowing us to question with confidence the personal and individual experience of growth. And you're referring to that here because they're not in a position where the guru, what they say goes. You're
Right.
able to question a peer, and you may or may not have a ready answer, and that's okay. That's not a problem. It is expected that you're sharing your experiences as you're growing, as kalyana as friends along the path.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that was really beautifully expressed, Ted. As Rick said, I can only echo what Rick said, that it's very, very different than the classroom teaching I do, because we're peers in the room, and I certainly make no claims about being a spiritual teacher. I certainly stick to the word facilitator, and I think that, as you both mentioned, that frees people up to be more direct and honest in their questioning. It also has people rely on themselves a little bit more. I really think it's so valuable to stick to our experience rather than what someone else says we should be experiencing. And when we're in a room full of peers, we are sticking to our experience. It helps us to stick to our experience. And that helps us to be our own teachers by critically evaluating both what others have told us about the practice, but also by critically evaluating our own expectations of ourselves in the practice. So I find sitting in a circle with a room full of peers is a great way to just support that approach to practice, that type of approach to practice.
Well, and this kind of practice fits in very well with secular culture, which seems to have as some key qualities the idea of individual effort and things that are demonstrably beneficial in your life. And that's what we're doing with these groups is it's not a matter of ripping down the walls of religion. It's about opening up this practice to people who can adapt it to whatever their life circumstance is. If they're deeply religious in another tradition, if they're a Christian, they can still do a secular kind of practice and not have that conflict, because the end goals of a supreme enlightenment and a mystical experience from samsara isn't really part of this. It's our moment-by-moment experience, and we still want to have it positively transformative with ourselves and others and have a culture of progress. We don't have those ideological goals, and that it's less about that and more about development and just the development.
Yeah, exactly. I think when we speak of our experience, we may be using Buddhist techniques, but we're all just talking about our experience, and that doesn't really, culture, background, and religious beliefs don't really, they're a part of that, but they're not a barrier to that.
Right. So one of the other things I wanted to ask both of you is some of the challenges that you've run into in starting these groups, and with some of the experiences you've had and the others have had in the groups that have been challenges. And Tim, if you don't mind, we'll start with you.
Not to diminish what I think is really the great benefit and the importance in my own practice of starting a meetup, but I think one of the hardest parts was finding a space. Depending on where someone might live, it might be easier, but in Cambridge, it's pretty difficult. I was committed to starting the meetup, so I scheduled the first meeting, and that was 3 weeks. I was planning 3 weeks ahead, and for 3 weeks I called every place I could think of, and I couldn't find a space. All the churches were taken, and a couple of places that had community rooms could do it every other week. I couldn't find a place that would do it every week, and to me it was vitally important that it be every week for that consistency. And I think that was one of the things that Rick recommended to me, and I think was a very wise recommendation. So at the very last minute, I tried a yoga studio where I practice, and the owners were unbelievably gracious in opening their doors to us. So we found a spot. It was literally the day before, and there's good and bad to that because there are a few people who said they weren't able to make it because it's not the most accessible spot. It's accessible by bus, but not by the T here in Boston. I'm trying to think. I guess the only other challenges that things that I'd like to pass along were on Meetup. I've spoken to other people who facilitate groups on Meetup, and it seems very common for many people to join but not necessarily to attend. So that might be confusing for people who start in a Meetup. Just to give you an idea, there are I think 90 people who are officially members of the Meetup on the website, and usually 10 to 12 people attend each week. So just so people have an idea, because when the first week 50 people joined, and I thought, this is going to be interesting if 40 people show up. I'm not sure we would all literally physically fit in the space.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then the only other, the challenges that are worth mentioning are sort of that uncertainty that both Rick and I spoke about, the idea of when a new person comes, how to let the group become a group. One of the members was very, very generous, and he's had experience facilitating groups before, and he asked if we could talk, and so we met one day for tea and had a talk, and he talked about the sort of organic nature of a group and how he finds in his experience that a group will often develop its own character, and the person who organized the group might have to take a few steps back and let the group evolve as it will. And that was very wise advice, and it's been very helpful for me because as sometimes discussions go the way I hadn't quite planned, and it's nice to remember to sit back and let that happen because there are 12 people in the room and it doesn't have to conform to my agenda. And I always remind people that I'd love to have them participate and lead something if they'd like to. So we've had 4 people one person leads Qigong, we've had a couple of people lead meditation, we've had someone lead a walking meditation. So it's really wonderful to watch as other people become more and more active in the group.
Well, I imagine that's one of the nice things to see is that you've started this group in the same way that, you've seen a child take its first steps and then they're going to walk on their own in their own direction. So it will develop on its own, and it may not necessarily be what we have as our predetermined idea. It may not match our concept that we have in our head, but it doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It just means it's different than the notions we originally had, and that going with that's okay.
Yeah, and it's another aspect of practice, which is really, really great.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Rick, how about you? What are some of the challenges that you've run into?
Certainly some of the same things that Tim has run into. Finding space is, even in this little island town where I live in, finding space is constantly difficult. I've had to move a couple of times. I'm starting in a new space, this coming Monday, as a matter of fact, because our little group has grown a bit. But yes, finding space, anybody thinking about doing this, be prepared for that. Give yourself plenty of time. Give yourself, weeks, months ahead of time, because you'll be surprised at how challenging that can be. Certainly, also, I would agree with him about how many people sign up versus how many people show up.
Sign up versus show up.
And I would just sort of throw the Pareto principle out there, the 80-20 rule. I would say 20% maximum are going to show up. So Ted's saying he's got about 90 people right now and maybe a maximum of about 12 show up. That's more or less my experience, as well. Ballpark in there. The next challenge is again balancing, as Tim mentioned, balancing the format, the agenda, with letting things unfold organically and letting the group dynamics happen. Now that is a balancing act because the people in the group, others have expectations about the format and how the meeting is going to go, and if it goes too far off track, they're not going to be happy. But again, if you're too rigid and shut people down, well, they're not going to be happy. So it is really a balancing act, but again, it's also a good practice point, because here you are sitting facilitating your group, and you have an idea of what your expectations are, and and reality starts to be different, and you start.
Not that ever happens to anyone.
And and there you're confronted right away with suffering because what is not what you expect. So it's a good practice point, but again, you do need to balance it so that it doesn't go off.
Yeah, I've heard some groups, when they do breakout sessions at various centers, that they do have a polite reminder at the beginning, depending on what the breakouts are about, to make sure that everyone understands it is not an opportunity for focus to be taken into personal therapy. That's not what these are about. And that's sometimes a risk that we have when we say, we want to hear what your stories are. Yeah. We do, as long as we're not co-opting the entire discussion to make it a story about whatever your personal story is.
Now, along those lines, I'll just add the last point of challenging is as soon as one begins to facilitate groups, you are inevitably going to encounter, let's call them, difficult people, and the group, rightfully so, will expect you to be able to handle it in some way, shape, or form, so I take a couple of different tacks with that. One is I try to respond. Now, you had mentioned sometimes folks might try and make it a therapy session. Certainly that happens. But there's also groups who are going to want to make it their own personal debating club, and drill into the fine points of this, that, and the other thing, and not let go. Pit bulls. And so the way I deal with both those issues is, first of all, I ask myself this kind of corny cliche question: what would Buddha do? And I'm trying to make it not about my ego response.
Yeah.
Right? Because now I've just engaged in them, and a different dynamic starts to take hold that's no healthier, than the one I'm trying to deal with. So, also, fortunately, I've had a fair amount of assertiveness training. In fact, taught that at one point. So I am able to relatively not add fuel to the fire, as it were. And then probably the last thing I do is, if it's going to go on too long, is I'll invite that person to carry on offline, meet for coffee or something like that.
Well, in work, doing facilitation, when topics come up that they're important, at least to one person who brings it up, to say that, that's a very good topic. Maybe what we should do is have a separate session where we can talk just about that, and we'll plan that for another meeting. And that gives the attention that's needed, because often it is about attention, but still acknowledges the validity of what the topic is that's brought up. So moving on to one of the things I wanted us to wrap up about is, we're seeing, I think, in particular with things like Meetup and with a podcast, and Rick with your site and stuff like that, a lot of momentum around secular Buddhist practice, which is something that's relatively new in its identification as secular Buddhism. And I'd just like both of you to comment a little bit about why you think that is happening now and where you see that going. Rick, if we could start with you.
Well, I think the reason that it's suddenly becoming more awareness is growing around it is, I think it's really just a sort of a natural thing. Whenever Buddhism goes to a new place, it adapts, and I really think this is not any different than that. When Buddhism, originally came, there was, I think firstly it was the Zen tradition that came to America, and then the Vipassana or Theravada, and then finally, really the Tibetan. The Tibetan is just the most sort of colorful, and therefore it seems like it's been here a long time, but of the three schools, it actually hasn't. And Vipassana really was, there's really no such thing as Vipassana Buddhism per se, because it's a form of meditation, if you want to put it that way, right? So I think what's happening with secular Buddhism is it's simply a form of Buddhism that the local population in North America can relate to. So I really think it's no different than what's happened to Buddhism everywhere else in the world where it's gone, where it has simply adapted to the local culture.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I see that you've mentioned North America, and I suspect it's even more so an opportunity in Europe. I just posted on the Facebook page that the UK is, for the first time by majority, 51% people have declared themselves as not religious.
Wow.
And so that's kind of a fairly big deal for them to have broken that 51%. Mm-hmm. And I know that in various studies on religious practices that Europe, at least at the current time, seems to be a bit more secular than the United States. And so that there is, I think, some opportunity for growth there as well, in having a secular Buddhist practice. We call it Buddhism when really it's just, these are practices that people can do. And I still use the term secular Buddhism in a recognition of this is what the root of it is, that we're not trying to hide in any way that, yes, this is coming from early Buddhist teaching, and that's what that's about, but that we're kind of challenged with there are cultural things that have grown onto that over the intervening millennia that may not fit as well with our modern, more secular Western view of looking at things. Tim, how about you? Where do you see this going, and why the energy around it these days?
It sort of seems that a lot of awareness is also coming from the world of both health and the science community. There's been so much research into the physiological effects and benefits of meditation or any sort of contemplative practice. And I think if you look at the world of psychology, there's also a rapidly expanding appreciation of the benefits of a meditation practice. And I think those have been sort of percolating in the popular press and just in people's awareness for a number of years now, and it's just continuing to grow. Maybe it is a sort of thing where it's reaching a critical mass that people are talking more and more about it, so that it just becomes more prevalent in people's awareness. I also the idealistic side of me also wonders if we have the great benefit of living in such an affluent society where every day we see that happiness is not determined by stuff and entertainment.
Yeah. Yes, brilliant. Yes, absolutely.
While it can be a hindrance, it can also be a great lesson every day to see, nope, that stuff didn't make me happy today.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. That's where we see a fertile ground for this kind of approach, in that we have those things that we identified, that it's very much based on one's personal efforts, that there is more of that peer kind of model, Rick, that you were talking about, and that's what this particular approach to early Buddhist teaching is about. One of the things I like to mention to the folks who are listening is that Tim and Rick and I were chatting about some of the things that will be helpful to others who are considering starting their own meetup groups for secular Buddhism. So prior to this episode being released, we'll be putting together some guidelines and some suggestions for people who want to start their own meetup groups, and we'll be posting that. Rick, I imagine we can get you to post whatever we come up with on your site, and certainly we'll have it on the episode page for this, and we'll put it under resources on the Secular Buddhist page. Rick, Tim, is there anything else either of you would like to cover?
No, that's great. It's nice that we're having our first international conference.
This is our first international conference. Yep, you were here.
And it's just a pleasure, and nice to finally chat with you in person, Tim.
Yeah, I don't have anything any more content to add. I just want to thank you both. It was great to talk about this, and it was your first interview with Rick. I don't know when you first spoke, but I listened to it, I think, the end of August. And, that's what sort of inspired and motivated me to give it a try. And I'm really grateful to both of you, because that's what was the impetus for me actually doing it. And it's turned out to be really wonderful and a lot easier than I would have thought before I tried. So I'm hoping that this resource document will help others and help others to see that it may not be as difficult as you might imagine, and that there is support out there to help you get through some of the challenges that you might face.
Exactly. Excellent. Good point. And I do hope that people who are listening to the podcast who are teetering on the edge of, gee, should I start a meetup group? It seems kind of hard. Take a look at the resources that we'll have available to make it not as hard as you think, and understand that there are benefits to your own practice, in particular for folks who have been challenged with having regular meditation practice, because we all run into that. That happens a great deal. This is one way to help support your practice, and that you starting the group doesn't mean that you have an albatross around your neck. It will take on its own life, and that there will be people who can move it forward once it's there, but it's an opportunity for you as well. So the two groups, just to mention again to folks who are listening, for Tim Kiely, the Cambridge Somerville Secular Buddhists, and for Rick Bateman, we have the Victoria Secular Buddhists. Rick, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Ted.
And Tim, thank you. Nice speaking with you.
Same here. Thank you, Ted.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the companion website at www.thesecularbuddhist.com, and you'll find an entire web page devoted to this and every episode. There are also links to discussions about today's topic on the Secular Buddhist Facebook fan page. The music for The Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizan Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi and Rodrigo Rodriguez. Their websites are linked on The Secular Buddhist on the About Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on The Secular Buddhist.